my first question is for Neal. Neal, you talked a lot about the genius of the American system. It's exceptional, the legal system. But why is the country, you think, so reluctant to sign up, let's say, to the ICC?
Okay, so before answering that question, I just wanted to take a moment of privilege to thank Gabriella and Janet and Micah and all the people who put this on. This has been a spectacular day, and I just really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for organizing this. Why has the United...
Yeah, round of applause.
Why has the United States been reluctant to join the ICC? Well, I think the experience goes back to something else that happened in America a few years ago called the independent prosecutor. That was a prosecutor that wasn't controlled by a political entity, totally independent. First, it was used to investigate the Iran-Contra investigation, and it went off the rails in all sorts of ways. And then it was used to investigate President Clinton for wrongdoing with Whitewater, some real estate deals, but ultimately it reached Monica Lewinsky and so on. And, you know, the American system is based on the idea that major decisions have to be made by politically accountable actors. That's what I was saying in my opening remarks. The problem with the ICC from the American perspective is there isn't any sort of political check. It's an independent prosecutor. And that has a lot of strengths and is undoubtedly needed in lots of places in the world, but it might be dangerous to use against America, particularly when it has troop commitments in any number of countries and the like. So I wouldn't want to, I just think it's real important. I know some of the European perspective is, oh, you haven't signed up to the ICC, it's hypocritical, how can you talk about human rights? But that's one thing in a sea of other things, and yeah, you know,
it's a pretty big thing, though, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure how big of a thing it is. I'm not sure.
The ICC is intended to epitomize international justice, and yeah, the Americans just don't play a part. Whereas at the same time, I guess trying to be a world leader when it comes to.
But the American perspective is we have a justice system that itself already does that. The ICC should fill and does fill the gap for the rest of the world for those countries in which you need it. It's not clear from the American perspective that you need it in America. But the bottom line is, look, I mean, we can disagree about the ICC, we can disagree about this or that, but I do think that there's something fundamentally great about the American system. I'm not saying that no other country has it, but this idea that we make mistakes, that our country is built on the idea that our leaders are going to make mistakes, and we're trying to figure out, you know, in fits and starts, but how can we self-correct, and how do we acknowledge it? It's kind of a grown-up perspective as opposed to the, you know, the teenager says, I'm always right about everything, I never make any mistake. American perspective is, you know, we do make mistakes. Now, admittedly, sometimes we don't admit them as quickly as we should, but that's the conversation I'd like to see happening, which is forcing America to admit those mistakes earlier and then move on from them.
Okay. Okay, we'll leave it there for now. Let's go to.
You can get back to me. It's okay.
No. I do want to move on to John Paul. I mean, we talked a lot about, or you talked a lot about. The 9 years when you were basically torn apart by what had happened. You know, alcohol abuse, you didn't have any work. And it's all very well for you to take that huge step and forgive, but what does the offender need to do in order to make you able to forgive?
First, you have to think about yourself. You will not even wait your offender to come to ask for forgiveness. No, because you are the one who had problems. That's why I said that forgiveness is for you, not for the offender. In our case, like in Rwanda, some of the offender people who committed genocide, they are not there. You cannot wait. One day somebody will come to ask you for forgiveness because you are in trouble. You want a healing. You have children to raise. You want to love again because loving is healthy. Mm-hmm. Then, in this case, we can even say self-forgiveness. Then, you cannot wait that
So,
somebody...
but does that mean even if the offender said, you know, I don't care, I did the right thing, I don't regret what I did?
Yeah, in this, we don't talk about the offender because now it's you. Who has problems? Like me, those 9 years, I was trying, before I wanted to kill, to find him and kill him. I have never killed in my life. I didn't know how I was going to kill him. Then I ended up destroying myself. Then the offender was not there. He was in prison. He spent 8 years in prison. But my prison was more horrible than his. In prison, he was eating, so he was okay. But me, I lost my career. Then what I did is just to think about myself and my future of my family. Then I got this, for me it's a miracle. Then it brought, the power of forgiveness brought my life back.
And Faisal, what's the feeling in the camp that you were in? Is forgiveness something that's being talked about right now? Or people just want to go home, or they want...
Not yet. I think most people you talk to are very emotional and reactive right now. Their solution right now is to fight, and many of them are many of the men are just waiting for their chance to go back and fight. So they very much see the end to this, the solution to this is going to be through fighting or some sort of military action.
Yeah.
So that there is definitely, to stay on the theme of forgiveness.
Yeah, they're not there yet.
Not even
Yeah,
close.
and let's face it, Jean-Paul, I unfortunately think you're an exception. You know, how did your family and friends react when you said you were forgiving the people that killed half of your family?
In the beginning, I was rejected by my own friends. It was hard. But now, people have understood that forgiveness, it's not a gift you give to the other, it's for you. It's for you, it frees you from, it's hard, but it's possible.
Yeah.
If I did, you can do it.
Yeah, I could definitely try, but it's just, very, very difficult to imagine. But yeah, it's fantastic what you've done. Neal, why did you decide to take on the US government in that first bin Laden taxi driver case?
Yeah, so, I mean, it was an interesting thing. I mean, I teach constitutional law. I worked for the government as a national security advisor. And then all of a sudden, I took a case that was suing the government and on behalf of someone who's alleged to be part of Al-Qaeda. So it was a fairly unusual thing. It was something that caused a lot of problems at home. My aunt at Thanksgiving dinner walked off from the table. There were death threats. There were any number of things. And I remember, I mean, most vividly, that after I had argued Mr. Hamdan's case in the trial court, the Defense Department didn't let me see him, actually. They kept saying that I didn't have security clearances to go down to Guantanamo and see him. And, for a while I said, okay, that's true. I can just argue his case without meeting him. And that's ridiculous. It's his case. It's, I should be able to meet my client. And so I asked for that in writing. And then they said, oh, well, you can go, because they knew I was going to give it to the New York Times, And so I found myself on a plane to Guantanamo. And then I got to meet Mr. Hamdan for the first time. It was a long 30-hour trip. And he kicked everyone out of the room, and he said to me exactly the question you just asked, which is, why are you doing this? Why are you representing me? He said, your last client was Al Gore, the vice president. Why are you going from Al Gore to me? And I remember I was kind of taken. I was taken aback because I hadn't really thought about it in a while. I was so busy with the line-by-line argumentation in the case that I hadn't taken that step back and said, "Why am I doing this?" And then I told him, I said, my parents came to this country, America, from India, and they came here not because of the quality of its soil or because of the sports teams. They came here for one simple reason, which is they thought they could land on its shores and the country would treat them fairly basically fairly, and they treat their children fairly. And I told Mr. Hamdan that had been my experience throughout my life. I mean, you know, got to work at a very high level of the government and have security clearances, all sorts of things. And that I was deeply patriotic. I do think, you know, I know it's controversial in this room, but I do think America is the greatest country on earth. And when the president wrote that about the Guantanamo policy, I said, that is against my vision and my parents' vision of what America is. Because it said, if you're a foreigner, if you have, you know, one of the 5 billion people who don't have or more U.S. citizenship, then you get sent to this, you know, inferior trial in Guantanamo, kind of beat-up car version of justice. But if you're an American citizen, you get what we call the Cadillac. Here, I guess you call it the Peugeot or whatever. The beautiful standard of justice with the civil trial and all the accoutrements and so on. And I said, that's not what America's about. We don't have 2 trial systems just based on where your citizenship is. And that's why I took the case.
But then did you have any kind of, how do I put it, moral issues with going back to work for the government after a case like that? And the Obama administration, and we all know, you know, what the Obama administration has done with respect to drone strikes and
yeah, no, I didn't. Obviously, there were some specific conflict of issue things. I couldn't work on Guantanamo, for example, when I was in the federal government. But on the whole, I think that it's a real mistake for people to flee the government because they disagree with one policy or another. That's really what I was trying to say in the talk, which is we need to have those other voices in government. It's so important because, sure, there's a role for the outside entities, for the NGOs, for the international community, but there's also a role for people in the government. And if only one kind of person goes into the government, then you get bad decisions. And you know, and so that's what I really hope to accomplish with this line of thinking.
Okay. Yeah, it's clearly a theme, you know, in taking brave decisions and decisions that you had death threats and your family wasn't happy. Jean-Paul, you also took a step. What about you, Faisal? Just making the trip to a Syrian refugee camp, I can imagine you calling up your parents and saying, hi guys, I'm not in USC anymore, I want to go to. How did they take that?
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely worried throughout the whole trip. Not just my parents, especially. I mean,
yeah,
I guess.
4 of you.
Yeah, the other 3, 2 Americans and 1 Czech. I'm sure their parents were a million times more worried because it was much more of a mystery to them where exactly they were going. At least my parents were familiar with the locations and the people, but there is very much. I mean, the Syrian government, the Assad regime right now, they have an army, an online army, hunting people down on Facebook. So everyone, not only are people afraid to have their pictures taken and displayed anywhere, they're also afraid to say anything online, on Facebook, to post anything. So there's definitely a sense of fear because nobody knows what's going to happen at this point. Whether
including you, do you have?
I mean, including me. I have the luxury of being outside of Syria, so I would not go back. No, because of this and other things, and my father, you know, works with the opposition and stuff. So we would not risk going back to Syria at this moment because we know for sure, at least his name, for example, is wanted. So by association or affiliation, by being his son, or anything that I'm doing, there is definitely a risk of going back. We were worried, I was worried, my parents were too, about going to the Zaatari camp. The Zaatari camp is like 10 kilometers away from the Syrian border. It's super close. We were worried about that, about somehow there are definitely government spies in the camp and stuff like that. So I think that was a fear. That they would be watching, they would know, they would care. I mean, nothing happened, thankfully.
Okay. Let's open it up to the audience. Are there any questions for anyone on the panel? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Question for Faisal. Faisal, I'm wondering, how were the women and children managed in the camp? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I think as soon as you get to the camp, you'll see that, one, there's a lot of children. They're everywhere. They're in the dirt and gravel running around playing. So there's a huge young population. And then in terms of the thing is, if you have a husband or a brother or an uncle to take care of you, it's manageable. Just because based on the culture and tradition. But many of these women have come to the camp after their husbands have been killed or their sons or brothers have been killed. So many come without, I guess you'd say, like a head of household, a male head of household. So especially in this culture, especially in the camp, it's a little more conservative too. It's super difficult for them, and I think they do struggle the most
To get by.
To get by, yeah.
Okay. Another question? Yes, sir.
A very good afternoon. My name is Khalid Chaudhry from International Human Rights Commission. My compliments for the organizers for organizing such an event, which will be which will make a history. My question for Mr. Neal: the drone attacks, a killer of human being, a robot, which is being used by the United States of America, violating sovereignty of sovereign countries, violating airspace of Pakistan or Yemen or elsewhere, killing thousands of people. Right now, I have the figures, more than 2,000 Pakistanis have been killed.
What's the question, sir?
Okay, so these people have been killed. Don't you think that United States of America stands fit for trial in International Criminal Court on war crimes, including George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld?
Okay,
and
so let's,
American justice.
It's a good question.
Okay,
It's a good question. So, although the U.S. isn't signatory to the ICC, would it, be fit to be? Are the drone attacks?
Yeah, I'm
fit for
not
trial?
aware of any scholars of international law. Maybe they're out there who say that the drone attacks that they've been carried out are tantamount to war crimes. Some of them, obviously, some of the drone attacks are done with the consent of the sovereign government at issue. So I'm not sure of what the facts are that lead to the predicate of the question that you've so powerfully asked. I do think that the American government could do a lot more than it's doing, and to make sure that we're only using drone strikes when necessary. And that's why I really do believe that we need to create some sort of adversarial system within the government, just like what I was doing in Guantanamo, but now inside the government, so that people will say, hey, you want to carry out a drone strike on person X or target Y? Well, we don't think that's a good idea, and here are the reasons why. And they'll have to keep on doing it as repeat players. So if they did it in, every single time, they'd lose their credibility with the decision makers. And so the idea of trying to instill kind of a repeat player interaction is, I think, crucial to that. Right now, there isn't, I think, any such voice. I don't know. I didn't work on this in
Could this
government.
be the new opportunity for you? To set up such an adversarial body?
I don't know if it's the opportunity for me, but it's certainly the opportunity for someone, because I do think, and I recognize the question and its force, and I think the only way we can assure people like you that we don't need to resort to these other mechanisms for justice is to first get our own house in order and do it right the first time. And maybe, again, we'll make mistakes and we'll need to then have some other solution. But let's first try and do that.
I think it's also must be difficult, though, because the drone attacks, if we're zooming in on that, were going on under the Bush administration. They've gotten, they've increased under the Obama administration. There was this really weird case about an American citizen being killed by a drone attack, which is effectively something that happened without the say-so of a judge or public opinion, nothing. So, yeah, it's all very well to say these are mistakes that need to be corrected, but why not just sign up to the ICC?
Well, I'm not sure that the ICC would do any better job of dealing with this. I mean, so that's one real problem with it, is I think we need to really figure out measures of justice that work and work quickly, and I'm not quite sure that the ICC's record can deliver on such a thing. So that's one thing. And then another is, again, I'm not sure that the predicate here, which is the ICC is of course about war crimes, I'm just not sure that, I understand there's any number of disagreements about drone policy, but to call them war crimes is, I think, at least I haven't seen the international scholars that say that that's right.
Okay, we've got time for one more question from the audience. Ma'am, right in the middle, awkward place to get to with a mic.
Thank you. I'm working at the defense at the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. My question is for Neal. So, and the common reaction to this is, oh, you're with the terrorists, with the bad guys. I would like to ask, what was your experience and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a hard one because, you know, in the same way as we were hearing before, I mean, these horrible tragedies have huge emotions at stake, and victims' families. And when you take a case like this, you're not working against the victim's family. That's not what you're about. You're not trying to, you know, twist the knife in deeper. You're trying to vindicate a principle. But it's really hard. Emotion clouds that. And, you know, and I understand that. Victims' families often said some pretty tough things to me, and I appreciated that and understood it. It's hard to hear. But at the same time, I steeled myself by saying, you know, if I don't do this, what's going to happen to the system? You know, do we want a victor's justice? You know, do we just want a system where there is no justice and we just, you know, get revenge on people? That's not what we're about. It's not what your tribunal's about. It's not ultimately what you want in Rwanda. It's, you know, there's a deeply human impulse to really see justice done, and you play a part in that. And it's so important what you're doing, even though I know on a day-to-day basis it can be very, very hard.
Wow, that's couldn't have written a better script to end TEDxHagueAcademy, actually. Thank you very much, Neal.